Before I started a YouTube channel, I gave a lot of thought as to whether I should start one or not. I couldn't really convince myself that I had anything to offer when I looked at people who already had channels, successful channels. They all seemed to be a good deal younger than I was. And so I hovered back and forth on what would I talk about? Who would listen? And how would people know I was there? That was a question that really spun round my mind for a long time. How do people know you're there? And would I stick to one subject? So it took a while for me to convince myself that I should go ahead and start up a channel. And by then, of course, I had convinced myself that if nothing else, I could talk about my own life. And as far as I could see, I was a pretty old person on YouTube. So therefore, I could theoretically reach back further than most of the people who were already established. Didn't work out that way, of course. Well, that was kind of my thinking. And then, of course, there was always politics. Would I talk politics, and how could I avoid speaking about politics? And that's kind of where it went ultimately when I did start the channel. It hasn't really changed very much, I don't think. I've added, of course, the hopefully entertaining idea of film reviews once a month, which people seem to enjoy. But leaving that aside, what I talk about is either about my life or politics and how politics has affected my life. And I do that on the assumption that being an ordinary person, like my viewers, if politics has affected me negatively, then it will have affected other people negatively. And that helps, I hope, other people to realize that they are not alone in how they're being affected by decisions made by people that they will never know, never meet, and don't care about. Because ultimately, that's what comes to pass. Decisions are made that affect all of our lives by people we never get to meet. How successful that is, well, that depends on how you measure success. You can measure it I suppose, in terms of numbers, how many people watch your channel. You could attempt, and it would be an attempt, to measure success by what kind of positive impact, if any, you've had on other people's lives. Don't know how you would do that, of course, but I'm sure it's possible. Personally, I try to keep my mind away from viewing figures. I think the main thing is that people come on a regular basis, which tells me, rightly or wrongly, of course, it could be wrong, but I like to think people come to the channel regularly because they like what they hear and probably agree, if not all, at least most of what I say they agree with. But again, I don't know. This is speculation on my part, of course. And as I said in the other video, these short videos are to give me a chance to speak about things and not get sidetracked by conversations on a live stream, which is what happens, of course. Now, I don't mind that. That's the way conversations are in life, after all. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect in some real way with one another through this medium, which is not really geared up properly for proper communication between human beings. It could be a lot better, but that's the idea. So if I speak uninterrupted, then that gives you, the audience, a chance to take in, hopefully, what I'm talking about. It gives you a better chance, I think, to comment on, or at least consider or appreciate what it is I'm talking about. In that last video, the first one, I was talking about my coming into the world, how that came about. So if we fast forward that to the point when I'm a boy, a young boy, and I'm outside the house playing. Now remember, I live in Scotland. Everybody I know lives in a tenement building. So where is it we're playing? Well, we're playing on the pavement or at the back of the houses. That's it. And people have asked me about this. In fact, the very first time I appeared on somebody else's channel as a guest, that was one of the first questions that I was asked, which surprised me. And the question came from a man who had lived his entire life on the southern coast of England, down in Cornwall, someplace, one of those places, Devon, somewhere. And it was quite illuminating, actually. And the question he asked me was, what was it like to be a child growing up in the 40s and the 50s? What was it we did? I thought that was a really interesting question. And of course, I gave him the, the answer uh, that I could remember. And what I remembered from those days is the fact that, and I'm only speaking for myself now, that I had maximum freedom to play out on the street. And if I wasn't on the street playing, where my mother's house was, it wasn't too far from 3 public parks. One was definitely a park for children that had swings and roundabouts and a bit of grass where you could run about mad. It was called the Lady Alice Park. The much bigger park was in the opposite direction from the house, and it was called the Well Park. It was covered in formal gardens, benches for people to sit a while, amusements, the usual swings and roundabouts, and a sand pit. Remember that? It was walled in, the sand pit. Quite a sizable thing, I remember. Roundabout. As I say, trees and flower beds that were well looked after. And on one side of it, it had a putting green, which was open during the summertime. I spent a lot of time there because when I was at my great grandmother's house, it wasn't far from her house either. Short walk, or in my case, a brief run up to the Well Park, and I was there. You could see my great grandmother's house from the park, in fact. It was on a higher elevation, as this town is famously built on hills all over the place. So I could be there playing. And then the other park was called the Murdison Park, which had formal football grounds marked out. Also had swings and roundabouts, fenced off from the football, of course. Green areas where you could run about crazy. And it was a place where water was stored from the hills, ran off the hills, and eventually ran into the Murdison Park, these 2 dams, and were allowed to trickle their way down to the Clyde, ran under the town. all the way down into the Clyde. So these were the three main playing areas for me growing up. And the Murderson Park, where these dams were, there was always a family of swans, at least one family of swans, usually more than one family. So you could watch the swans or feed them if you had stale bread or anything like that. Used to take empty jam jars and clean them out, tie string around the open neck, take it up to the Murderson Park and fish for minnows. Did that many a time. Spent many hours doing that, in fact. Never did anything with them, we just caught them. Put them in another jar and see how many you could catch in an afternoon. Then put them back in to the water before you went home. Well Park was a great place for me because this is where I went roller skating. It was a brilliant place for roller skating. Spent many a happy hour up there. And then, of course, there was all the other informal games that we played outside near the house on the streets. Because what would happen back then, I'm talking about the early 50s now, what would happen is it got to 6 o'clock and any traffic that was on the road, and there wasn't much, it would just stop. And most of the traffic back then, when I was growing up, was horse and cart. Of course, there was buses, of course, taking factory workers home. Shipyard workers were getting taken home by buses as well. But the bulk of the traffic in the town during the day was horse and cart. And that was pretty good, actually. And it's one of those things that as you get older, the memory of it becomes fonder. Because I can remember you would stop and talk to the horses, clap them, and never any bother. The horse would just either look at you or just stand there ignoring you. But yeah, I think children today definitely miss out on that contact with animals like that. You could just reach your hand out and clap them and nothing would happen. It was perfectly safe. Never thought too much about it at the time because it was part of life. But as I say, when they disappeared and you begin to look back, there is a fondness grows up. Because now you're old enough to realise what you've missed. And children definitely are missing out when they miss out on that. And then, of course, there was all the games that we used to play. On the street, that is. And a lot of these games, you didn't need anything to play them. Just other people. Yeah, if you play a game like 3 and you're out, well, all you needed was other people. And you chased after each other and if you were touched 3 times, you were out of the game. Last man standing was the winner. King ball was a game like that as well. But you used the ball, a small ball, but the size of a tennis ball. And there was always somebody who had a ball that size anyway. And there was various games you could use playing it. Playing games with the ball that size. The hide and seek was another regular game that we played. Again, all you needed was other people. And the other thing to remember about all of this, there was no barriers. In other words, boys and girls just played together. The girls wanted to play any of these games, they were included. Nobody asked permission, they just came and played. Only separation that there ever really was made by us boys. If the girls were playing skipping ropes, they had the ropes out and they were playing various skipping games, then we didn't take part in that. That was a girls' game. That's what it was seen as. So the girls played that on their own. But other than that, the other games, such as Follow the Leader, girls played that as much as boys did. It wasn't always a boy who was a leader. Quite often, it could be a girl. She'd be as brave or as crazy as the boys would be, jumping high dikes and doing all sorts of crazy things. So boys and girls mixed in their games. It's a complete lie and a complete nonsense for anyone to say otherwise. You should play a game. I think outside my local area, it was called Statues. We called it Eldenun Rossi because that's what you called out. And what happens was one person would stand at one side of the pavement and everyone else went across the street to the other side of the pavement, and you turned your back and you called out Eldenun, Eldenun, Eldenun Rossi. And while you were calling that out, everyone else was sneaking up behind you. And the idea was for them to touch the wall in front of you before you could see them. But if you saw the person before they touched the wall, then they were out of the game. Again, simple. Didn't need anything to play the thing. But as I say, I think in other areas it was called Statues. They might have had other names. And then, of course, football. All the boys would want to play football. That would be an incredible sight, 20 a side. And of course, nobody had a proper football. It was usually one of these small tennis ball things. And you just played on the street. Marked out goal posts. People, some of the boys would take their jackets or jumpers off, put it down and pace out a goal a goal area. Their jumpers would mark the goalposts. Somebody would pick sides and that was you. You had a game of football. As I say, far too many on each team, never mind. I don't remember myself playing it very often. Then there was KKK. That was a favourite. kiss the girls and all that stuff. That was a good fun. And then we had another favourite was kick the can. Find an empty can, hopefully fairly clean inside, and it was just a question of deciding on an area either on the pavement or on the street itself would be the base. You put the can in the base and somebody kicks it, and everybody else there goes running after the can and taking it back to the base and plonking it there. And then you could mark somebody out for being out of the game if you're the person with a can. So that was the idea. So it was important that you get hold of the can before anybody else did. And then we had Tig, of course, simple game again. And there was loads of others, toss a coin, either a penny or a halfpenny. Seem to remember it being mainly pennies, but you could play it with a halfpenny as well. And that was a serious game because you could lose money at it. So we had loads and loads of games we played. And the thing that surprised me is when I was seeing all this on this live stream, the man that had asked the question, who, as I say, had never, it's spent his whole childhood in this part of the country, identified almost all the games that I had brought up. Sometimes they had different names, of course. And that really set me aback. The fact that I was here in the west of Scotland and this man's down in the south of England and he's playing the same games. I found that quite remarkable, and I still do. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but it's quite remarkable if you sit and think about it just for a minute. Just think, how could that be? Well, it was. So anyway, that's something to be thinking about, and I'll leave it there because you know, no doubt you've got your own games. You'll know some of this stuff, but you'll have other games that were particular to where you lived. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and it's rekindled